Hello, welcome. If you enjoy these stories, please check that you are following and drop a comment where you're listening from. It's a small way to contribute and tell the algorithm to recommend my stories to more people like you. There is a photograph. You have almost certainly seen it before. A young woman, dark-eyed, still, and upon her, a crown of gold. Not a modern crown, something older, stranger. Thousands of tiny gold leaves and rings cascading down over her forehead in fine chains. Around her throat, gold. At her ears, gold. The man who took that photograph told the world these were the jewels of Helen of Troy. The face that launched 1,000 ships, finally given a body to wear her treasure. It is one of the most reproduced images in the history of archaeology, and nearly everything you have been told about it is a lie. The gold is real, and it is ancient, and it came out of the earth exactly where the man said it did. But it is not Helen's. It is not Priam's. It is roughly 1,000 years too old to have anything at all to do with the Troy of Homer's war. And the woman in the photograph, the man's own wife, was not even present on the day he claimed to have pulled it with his bare hands. So here is the question I want to put to you tonight. When a very rich man tells you he has found a lost city, and the gold in his hands is genuine, does it matter that almost everything he said about how he found it was invented? The man's name was Heinrich Schliemann. By his mid-40s, he was one of the richest self-made men in all of Russia, rich enough that he never needed to work another day in his life. Most men, having made a fortune like that, would have bought a title, or a seat, or simply a comfortable silence. Schliemann bought something stranger. He bought a fake past, brick by brick, lie by lie, until the fable was so beautiful and so complete that the whole world forgot it wasn't real. So the question is, did Heinrich Schliemann really find Troy, or did he make it up? We are going to weigh that question tonight the way an auditor weighs a ledger. Slowly, line by line, findings on one side, inventions on the other. And I am not going to tell you the verdict until the very end, because as you will see, the verdict is the whole point. Welcome, Midnight Magnates. This is Mr. Calder. As the world goes quiet, we step into the shadows to uncover the stories that built our world. If you enjoy listening or falling asleep to the hidden history of power, fortunes made, and the human nature behind the price of greatness, then this is the place for you. We are close towards a milestone for this little channel. 500 followers. It is not much, I know, but it is progress, and I cannot get there without your help. So if you have thoroughly enjoyed one of my episodes, share it with a friend who needs it. Thank you. Settle in, let the lights go low, and let's begin. The Turkish coast, late May 1873, somewhere past midnight, by the light of a lamp, a wealthy foreigner is moving quickly across a hillside, and he is moving quietly because what he is doing is theft. Not the theft of a purse or a jewel, the theft of a nation's treasure, out from under the noses of the men paid to guard it. Here is the arrangement he agreed to. He has a permit, a firman, from the Ottoman government to dig at this mound, and The terms of that permit are simple. Whatever comes out of the ground, the Sultan's government is entitled to half of everything. Those are the rules. He signed them. But tonight the rules do not suit him. Because tonight, at the bottom of his enormous trench, something has caught the lamplight. Gold. Not a coin, not a ring. A hoard. Diadems, vessels, bracelets, weapons. Thousands upon thousands of tiny gold beads and rings and leaves. A king's ransom, buried for millennia, and now cradled in the arms of a 51-year-old former commodities trader who has absolutely no intention of giving half of it to anyone. So he moves it off the mound, off Ottoman soil, across the water, island by island, through the scattered ports of the Greek Isles, until it reaches a locked room in Athens where no Sultan's official can touch it. Historians have since traced the outlines of that clandestine little operation. The covert pickups, the transshipment through the islands, the careful evasion of Ottoman customs. It was not a spur-of-the-moment grab. It was a smuggling run, planned and executed by a man who had, remember, spent a whole earlier life moving valuable cargo around blockades and inspectors and inconvenient authorities. He had run gunpowder past a British navy. A hoard of gold past a few Ottoman watchmen was for him almost restful. And then he tells the world a story. He says he saw the gold glint in the trench wall with his own eyes. He says he called an early lunch break to clear the workers away so that no one would see. And he says that his beautiful young Greek wife, Sophia, stood beside him in that trench and gathered the treasure up into her shawl and carried it out against her chest, risking everything, the two of them alone, with the gold of a vanished age. It is a perfect scene, intimate, cinematic, heroic. And it did not happen. His wife was not there. She was in Athens the entire time, hundreds of miles away, in mourning for her father. Schliemann admitted this himself, later, in his own hand. There was no shawl. There was no two-person heist in the lamplight. He invented her presence because the story was better with her in it. And the gold he would soon parade before the crowned heads of Europe as the treasure of King Priam, the doomed ruler of Homer's Troy. That gold is real, but it does not belong to Priam. It cannot, because it was already more than 1,000 years old, and the Troy of the Trojan War was built. Nobody in 1873 could see that yet. I want you to carry it, though. Carry it like a marked bill in your pocket through everything that follows, because the day comes, later tonight, when that single fact detonates the entire legend. So, which did he do? Did he dig Troy up, or did he make it up? We weigh it act by act, and the verdict comes only at the end. To understand what happened on that hillside, you have to understand the man who climbed it, and to understand the man, you have to follow the money, because the money, all of it, came out of chaos. If these stories speak to you, if you find comfort in the lessons found in the quiet corners of history, tap the follow button to join our circle of dreamers and let the next story find you when you need it most. Before he was the man who found Troy, Heinrich Schliemann was a boy who found the bottom. He was born in 1822 in a small town in northern Germany, the son of a Lutheran pastor. And the first lesson life handed him was about the fragility of a good name. His father, the pastor, was accused of embezzling church funds. Picture what that does to a family in a small 19th century town. The whispers, the averted eyes, the sudden understanding that respectability is a thing that can be taken from you overnight. His mother died when he was 9, and by 14, young Heinrich was not in a schoolroom, dreaming of ancient cities. He was behind a counter in a grocer's shop, weighing out herring and potato whiskey for other people, 12, 14 hours a day. He worked there for about 5 years, until his body gave out. He lifted a heavy barrel. Something tore in his chest. He began coughing blood, and just like that, the one job he had was gone. Now, here is where Schliemann himself would later tell you a beautiful story. He would say that in that grocer's shop, one evening, a drunken miller wandered in and began to recite Homer aloud in the original Greek, and that the boy, Heinrich, penniless and half-starved, listened to those rolling ancient lines and wept and swore then and there that one day he would learn that language and find that lost city. It is a lovely story. Remember it, because it is the first brick in a wall we are going to spend this entire evening taking apart. And it is a story for which there is exactly one source in all the world. Heinrich Schliemann. What actually happened next had nothing to do with poetry. In 1841, 19 years old and out of options, he signed on as a cabin boy aboard a brig bound for Venezuela. 12 days out, the ship sailed into a gale and foundered. The vessel went down. Schliemann washed up, alive, on the coast of the Netherlands, with nothing. That shipwreck is real, by the way. That one you can check, and it is the closest this story ever comes to a fresh start. A young man deposited by the sea onto a foreign shore with empty pockets and a working mind. Because what Schliemann did in Amsterdam in the years right after is the first glimpse of the machine that lived inside him. He took work as a messenger, as an office boy, as a bookkeeper, and in his spare hours, the hours other clerks spent drinking or sleeping, he taught himself languages: English, French, Dutch, Spanish, Portuguese, Italian. Not over a lifetime, over about 2 years. And the method he used tells you almost everything about the machine inside him. He would read aloud, constantly, for hours, whether or not anyone was there to hear. He memorized whole pages of text, word for word. He wrote a short essay every single day in whatever language he was currently devouring, and paid to have it corrected, and then memorized the corrections. He spoke to himself in the street. He recited in church. He is said to have rented a room next to strangers just so he could practice on them. It was not study. It was closer to possession. A man attacking a language the way a wolf attacks a carcass, and moving on to the next one before the last was cold. He would eventually claim command of well over a dozen tongues, And while we should treat any number Schliemann gives us about himself with real care, the core of it is not in doubt. The man was a genuine, freakish talent. A mind like a dry sponge dropped in water. And I dwell on this because it is the hinge of the whole moral problem of Heinrich Schliemann. It would be so much easier if he were a fool or a mediocrity papering over emptiness with lies. He was neither. He was formidable. Whatever he touched, he mastered. Languages, markets, men, and eventually the entire mythology of the ancient world. The lies were not a substitute for ability. They grew right alongside it, in the same soil, watered by the same relentless will. That is the uncomfortable thing this whole night keeps circling back to. The gift and the fraud were not two different men. They were one man, and you cannot have the discovery without the deceiver. And that is the thing I need you to hold on to tonight, because it complicates everything. Schliemann was not a stupid man playing a clever con. He was a brilliant man. That is what makes him dangerous. Now, the money. Fortune number 1. Indigo. In 1844, he joined an Amsterdam trading house as a clerk. Within 2 years, they had sent him to St. Petersburg as their agent, because who else could correspond fluently with buyers and sellers across half of Europe? And within a year of that, at just 25, he had gone into business for himself. Dyewoods, camphor, cigars, and above all, indigo, the deep blue dye that the whole industrial world wanted, and that Schliemann understood better than almost anyone. He compounded that business, quietly, patiently, for a decade. It made him a wealthy man before he was 30. Unglamorous, this fortune. Counting housework, ledgers and warehouses and dye lot samples. But it was the foundation under everything that came after. And then he heard about California. Fortune number 2, gold dust. His brother Ludwig had gone to the California goldfields and struck it modestly rich and then died out there. Heinrich sailed for America, arriving in 1851, and he took one look at the goldfields and understood something most of the men breaking their backs in the rivers never did. The money in a gold rush is not in the gold. The money is in the men who have the gold and no way to sell it. So, he did not dig. He opened a bank in Sacramento, a private banking house under his own name, and the mechanism was beautiful in its simplicity. A miner pans his gold dust out of the freezing river all week. He has raw dust, and he has no way on earth to turn it into spendable money. No way to reach the US Mint himself. He needs a middleman. He needs a man with a scale and a safe and connections. He needs Schliemann, who buys the dust at a hard discount and sells it onward, up the chain, at a markup. He is the bridge between the muddy riverbank and the mint, and he charges a toll to cross in both directions. By some accounts, his little bank bought and resold more than $1 million in gold dust in about 6 months. A staggering sum for the era. He did not dig for gold. He charged the men who did for the privilege of trusting him. And picture the room where that happened, because it is pure frontier. A rough counter in a boomtown thrown up overnight. a set of scales, a safe. Outside a river full of desperate men standing waist deep in cold water, panning for a future. And inside, dry, warm, patient, a young German with a ledger, the one man for miles who could turn their raw grit into real money, and who set the price of that conversion himself, because there was no one to undercut him and no law that cared. Every ounce that crossed his counter, he clipped on the way in and clipped again on the way out. He was not a miner, and he was not a bank in any regulated sense. He was a toll bridge, and the whole flood of a gold rush had no choice but to cross him. And who was at the top of that chain he sold onward to? Whose network ultimately took the dust? The House of Rothschild, a name some of you will recognize from another night in this study, another file. Their agent on the American coast was a man named Benjamin Davidson. Keep him in mind. Because it was Davidson, the Rothschild man, who first noticed that the numbers coming out of Schliemann's bank did not quite add up. The accusation was this, that the consignments of gold dust Schliemann was sending were short, underweight, less gold in the shipment than the paperwork claimed. Now, I want to be scrupulously fair here, because this is exactly the kind of moment where a story like this one tips over into slander, if you are not careful. This was an accusation. It was never proven in any court. It was never adjudicated. No one ever convicted Heinrich Schliemann of shortchanging anyone in Sacramento. But watch what he does next, because sometimes a man's own feet tell you more than any verdict. In April of 1852, soon after that complaint reached the Rothschild network, Schliemann suddenly sold the entire business, cited a fever, claimed his health, demanded he leave at once, and sailed for Russia. I am not going to tell you he was guilty. I am going to tell you the timing. A man with real institutional power starts asking pointed questions about your numbers, and you are gone by the next boat, pleading illness. You will see this pattern again tonight. It is, in a sense, the truest thing about him. Heinrich Schliemann always left before the audit. Fortune number 3, gunpowder. Back in Russia, the Crimean War broke out. And Schliemann, now a seasoned operator, found the seam again. He began dealing in saltpeter, sulfur, and lead, the 3 raw ingredients of gunpowder and shot, and selling them to the Russian government at war. When the British Navy threw up a blockade to choke off Russia's supplies, Schliemann simply rerouted his whole operation around it. Overland, through the Baltic, war material flowing to a combatant nation through the back door while the front door was barred. By 1855, his best year, he was listed on the St. Petersburg Exchange as the merchant with the single highest trade turnover in the entire city. By the war's end, he was reckoned one of the richest men in Russia. So there it is, 3 fortunes in roughly 15 years. Indigo, gold dust, gunpowder, a commodity trade, a boomtown bank, and a piece of a war. 3 different eras, 3 different places where the rules had not quite arrived yet, and one operator who reliably found the exact spot in each of them where no one else was standing to take the money. By his mid-30s, he was rich enough to stop completely. He never had to work another day. He did not stop. Something in him could not. Because here is the ledger as Chapter 1 closes it. On the one side, this is a man of real, undeniable genius. The languages, the timing, the sheer, relentless capability. None of that is fake. That is all true. And on the other side of the page, every single fortune ends the same way, with a swift, quiet exit, one step ahead of a question. A pattern is beginning to show through the paper, but it is only a pattern. Nothing is proven. The ledger stays open. Finding Troy. Inventing Troy. He has not yet touched a shovel, and already the story is moving faster than the man. Before we follow the money any deeper into the dark, if this file is keeping you company tonight, take a moment and tap the follow button. It costs you nothing, and it lets the next story find you when the hour gets late. Now, he had more money than he could spend, and still, the one ledger he could not balance was the story of who he was. We left him rich. Now watch him reach for the one thing a fortune cannot buy. But before we go back to the beginning of his reinvention, let me close a loop from the dark of the cold open, because it tells you exactly who this man was, and it will not take long. Remember the smuggled gold, the treasure spirited off the mound and across the islands to Athens in defiance of a permit he had signed. Well, the Ottoman government was not a fool. Within a year, they discovered what he had done, and they took him to court. And a settlement was reached. The court set a figure, a sum in the thousands of gold francs, to be paid to the Imperial Museum in compensation for the treasure he had stolen out from under them. And here is the tell. Schliemann did not fight it. He did not grumble and pay the minimum. He paid the figure several times over, far more than the court demanded, and in doing so bought himself not just clear title to the gold, but goodwill, and a couple of years later, a brand new permit to come back and dig again. Sit with what that means. He did not treat the court's judgment as justice. He treated it as a price. A fine to a man like Schliemann is not a punishment. It is an invoice. And a man who has spent his whole life learning that everything has a settlement number will simply pay the number and keep whatever he wanted to keep. He did not pay a fine. He bought a verdict. And notice, this is the tell within the tell. He did not even pay it grudgingly. He overpaid wildly. A guilty man, scrambling to minimize his losses, haggles the number down. Schliemann did the opposite. He threw money at the Ottoman authorities well past what the court required, because he had grasped something most defendants never do, that the fine was not the real transaction. The real transaction was the relationship. Pay enough, and generously enough, and the state that just convicted you of theft will turn around and issue you a fresh permit to come back and dig some more, which is exactly what happened. He was found to have robbed them, and he paid his way not merely to forgiveness, but to a renewed invitation. That is not the behavior of a man who fears the law. That is the behavior of a man who has priced it. That instinct that a rule is only ever a price tag is the key that unlocks the whole second half of his life. Because there was one thing, exactly one, that Schliemann could not buy at any price, no matter how many times over he paid: a past. Think about it. He had the money, he had the languages, he had the houses and the fame to come. What he did not have, what no self-made man can purchase at a counter, was provenance, and that word is worth pausing on, because it is the hinge of everything. Provenance, to a collector, is the documented history of an object, where it came from, whose hands it passed through, the chain of custody that proves it is what it claims to be. And provenance is precisely the thing a self-made man lacks about himself. The one commodity old money owns that new money can never buy. A story of origin that makes you belong. The aristocrats of Europe would take his money and smile at his dinners and drink his wine, and never, not once, quite see him as one of their own. Because he had no chain of custody. He was a grocer's boy who had gotten rich off dye and dust and gunpowder, and every duke in every drawing room could smell it on him. He knew it, and it ate at him. So he set out to forge the one document that cannot legitimately be forged: the provenance of a human soul. He decided to give himself a history worthy of the fortune. And the irony that will haunt the rest of this story is that a man obsessed with manufacturing his own provenance would go on to build his monument out of an object whose provenance he utterly destroyed. So he did what he had always done. He found the seam. And he decided that if he could not inherit a distinguished past, he would manufacture one. This is the hinge of the entire story. So I want to slow down and lay the fabrications out on the desk one at a time, the way the scholars eventually would, because each one on its own is small. It is the pattern that is damning. Exhibit 1. The dinner at the White House. In his diary, Schliemann records that in February of 1851, on his way through Washington, he was received at the White House and dined with the President of the United States, Millard Fillmore, and his family. An intimate evening with the most powerful man in America. Except there is no record of it anywhere. Not in the White House accounts, not in any other source. Nothing except Schliemann's own pen. And the classicist who examined the claim concluded that what most likely happened is that Schliemann read a newspaper account of a White House reception and then simply wrote himself into it, placed himself at the table, made himself a guest at a dinner he learned about in the papers. Exhibit 2. The Great Fire of San Francisco. Schliemann later published a vivid, breathless eyewitness account of a catastrophic fire that swept San Francisco. The roar of it, the panic, the city in flames. He dated his account to early June 1851. There is only one problem. The fire he is describing happened in early May, a full month before the date he gives, and Schliemann did not even arrive in the area until June the 1st. After the fire was over, after it had been thoroughly covered in the local newspapers, he wrote an "I was there" account of a disaster he could not possibly have witnessed. And in the act of faking it, he got the date wrong by a month. Exhibit 3. And this is the crown jewel, so hold it up to the light. The dream. The whole romantic engine of the Schliemann legend, the thing that makes him a hero instead of a profiteer, is the childhood dream. The little boy weeping at Homer in the grocer's shop. The 7-year-old given a picture book of Troy in flames and vowing, then and there, to spend his life finding the lost city. That dream is the reason we are supposed to forgive the gold dust and the gunpowder, because it was all secretly in service of a beautiful, lifelong destiny. The trouble is that the dream appears nowhere. A scholar named David Trail went through Schliemann's enormous archive. The diaries, the letters, decades of a compulsive writer documenting his own life, looking for that lifelong passion for Troy. And he found that it does not show up, not in his youth, not in his 30s. The idea of actually excavating Troy first appears in Schliemann's own writing in 1868, when he was 46 years old. The dream was not the cause of the fortune. The dream was a product the fortune purchased. He made the money first, got bored and hungry for a grander identity in his 40s, and then went back and painted a childhood destiny over the top of it, so that a rich man's late life hobby would read to history as fate. And do you want to know the detail that I find most telling of all? He did not only lie about the big things, he lied about small things, things that did not even matter. He backdated his American citizenship by nearly 20 years for no real reason, except that the earlier date sounded better. Whenever the true timeline was inconvenient to the story he wanted to tell about himself, Schliemann simply moved the date. It was not strategy. By the end, it was reflex, a compulsion. And that is the real antagonist of tonight's story, not a rival, not the Ottoman state. The enemy in this tale is a thing that lived inside the man himself. The absolute inability to leave a true story unimproved. He needed a face for the new legend, too. A wife who looked the part. And the way he went about acquiring one tells you again exactly how his mind worked, because he approached marriage the way he approached a commodity purchase. His first marriage had ended. He obtained the divorce by exploiting a liberal American residency law that let him move quickly, in the same maneuver by which, around this same time, he quietly secured American citizenship and then, of course, backdated it in his memoirs by nearly 20 years because the earlier date sounded better and cost him nothing to claim. And then he went shopping for a bride, literally, by correspondence. He wrote to an old tutor in Greece and effectively placed an order. A young Greek woman of the right family dark-haired, capable of embodying the classical past he was purchasing his way into. He even, by some accounts, tested candidates on their knowledge of Homer, as if interviewing for a role, which of course he was. He found her, Sophia, a Greek girl of 17. He was in his late 40s. 30 years lay between them, a fact I state plainly and leave plainly, without comment, because the record states it plainly. It was, in its way, one more acquisition for the brand, the living image of ancient Greece, on the arm of the man who intended to resurrect it. She would become the face in the photograph, the most valuable piece of marketing he ever produced. But that is getting ahead of ourselves. So, close the ledger on Chapter 2. On the finding side, there is almost nothing to enter tonight. The man hasn't dug anything yet. On the inventing side, the page is full. A dinner that never happened. A fire he never saw. A dream that was painted on afterward. A whole past, retrofitted to fit the future he wanted. He had the money. He had the myth he'd built for himself. Now he needed one more thing before he could go find his lost city. He needed to know where it was. And it turned out another man had already spent 15 quiet years figuring that out, finding Troy, inventing Troy. The dream is dated to 1868. He was 46. He had a fortune and a fabricated past to go with it. What he did not have was the ground, and a quiet Englishman had that. His name was Frank Calvert, and if there is a hero in this story, a genuine one, unpolished, unrewarded, it is him. So let me introduce him properly, because the man Schliemann was about to erase deserves at least one night in which his name comes first. Frank Calvert was British, born in 1828, into an expatriate family that had settled in the region of the Dardanelles, that narrow, storied strait where Europe and Asia nearly touch, and where, somewhere, the ancient world insisted the city of Troy had once stood. The Calverts were merchants and diplomats and landowners. Frank himself held consular posts in the area, the low, unglamorous work of representing foreign interests in a distant corner of a crumbling empire. And crucially, this matters enormously, his family owned land there. His brother had bought a large tract in the Troad, and that tract included part of a certain flat-topped mound called Hisarlik. Now, in Calvert's day, the great question, where was Homer's Troy if it was anywhere at all, was a live and respectable debate among educated men. Most of them favored a site called Bonarbashi, some miles from the sea. It fit certain lines of the poems. It had its champions. It was the conventional answer. To bet against Bonarbashi was to bet against the scholarly consensus of the age. He was not entirely alone in his heresy, to be fair, and Calvert, being an honest man, would have wanted me to say so. Back in 1822, the very year Schliemann was born, a Scottish geologist named Charles Maclaren had already argued in print that the mound of Hisarlik was the likeliest spot. It was a minority notion, mostly ignored, a line in a book. What Calvert did was take that ignored idea and spent his life testing it in the dirt, which is the whole difference between having a hunch and doing the work. Frank Calvert bet against the consensus. And then he did something the checkbook men never do. He proved it slowly. He spent the better part of 15 years on the problem. Not with a press agent, with his own hands and his own patient eyes. He walked the trode. He read the ancient sources against the actual landscape, matching Homer's descriptions to real ridgelines and real springs and real distances to the shore. And in the early 1860s, he began to dig small, careful, exploratory trenches into the mound at Hisarlik in 1863, and again in 65, gathering the pottery and the stratigraphy, reading the layers the way a banker reads a balance sheet. He did not have the money to tear the whole mound open, but he had enough to be sure. And slowly, methodically, against the fashion of his time, he became convinced. Not Bunarbashi. Here, this mound. Hisarlik was Homer's Troy. He was right. History would prove him completely right. And he knew it years before Heinrich Schliemann had given the matter a single serious thought. There was only one thing Frank Calvert did not have: money. His family's fortunes had turned. A full-scale excavation of that enormous mound was far beyond his means. He had the theory, the site, and a piece of the very land, and no way to fund the dig that would prove him correct. He needed a partner, a backer, someone with drive, and above all, capital. And then, into the trode, walked a very rich man who was shopping for a destiny. When Schliemann first came through the region, his own travel writing shows him leaning toward the conventional wisdom, toward Bunarbashi, like everyone else. He did not arrive with the answer. He arrived with a bankroll and a hunger. And Frank Calvert, generous, scholarly, fatally trusting. Frank Calvert sat this energetic newcomer down and gave him everything. The theory, the evidence, the reasoning that Hisarlik was the place. Access to the land his own family owned. 15 years of patient work, handed across the table to a man he took to be a fellow enthusiast, a collaborator, a friend. Why would he do that? Why hand your life's work to a stranger with money? Because that was the arrangement he needed. Calvert had the idea and the ground. He lacked the fortune to prove it at scale. Schliemann had the fortune and lacked the idea. On paper, it was a perfect partnership. The scholar supplies the where, the magnate supplies the means, and the glory surely gets shared. Calvert had every reason to believe he had just found his patron. What he had actually found was the man who would take his name off the map. You can hear it coming, can't you? Schliemann took the map that Calvert had drawn, and then he took the credit for the country it led to. When the excavations began and the finds started coming, and the world's newspapers lit up with the astonishing story of the rich amateur who was uncovering Homer's Troy with his bare hands, Frank Calvert's name was not in them. Schliemann's announcements, his books, his letters to the press, the entire triumphant public narrative, they told of one man, a lone genius guided by a childhood dream, vindicated by destiny. There was no room in that story for a patient English consul who had done the intellectual work first. Calvert did not fit the brand, so Calvert was written out. And here, I think, is the cruelest part. It was not even necessary. Schliemann could have shared the glory and lost nothing. The money was his, the labor was his, the relentless will was his. Calvert would have been a footnote of honor, the scholar who pointed the way. Instead, Schliemann needed the whole thing. The lone genius story could not tolerate a co-author. And so, a good and honest man watched the discovery of his life become someone else's monument, and said comparatively little and faded. Think about what that erasure actually cost him, day by day, year by year. Calvert did not leave the Trode. He stayed. He went on holding his quiet consular posts in the Dardanelles. He even served for years and without pay as the local American consular agent, living within sight of the very mound, while the whole world learned the name of the man he had handed his life's work to and never once learned his. He watched the books come out. He watched the crowned heads marvel. He watched Sophia in her diadem cross every front page in Europe. And he knew, he alone fully knew, that the theory under all of it had been his, tested in his own trenches, argued in his own notebooks, years before the great man ever arrived. He was not a bitter crank, shouting from the margins. By all accounts, he remained decent about it, corresponded civilly, even continued to help. Which somehow makes it worse. The most thorough erasures are the ones the victim is too gracious to fight. Frank Calvert died in 1908. In the public record of the greatest archaeological find of the century, he was, essentially, nobody. It would take until the very end of the 20th century, and a historian willing to go back through Calvert's own unpublished letters for the record to be corrected and his name restored to the discovery he made possible. We will get there tonight. I promise you. The auditor always gets there eventually. But Calvert did not live to see it. He is the mark. Every con needs one, and this was him. So weigh it. On the finding side, the ledger has something real to enter at last. The site was correctly identified. The theory was sound. Troy genuinely was under that mound. But that entry belongs by rights to Frank Calvert, and the man who was about to become world famous for it had already quietly scratched Calvert's name off the top of the page. Finding Troy. Inventing Troy. The city was real. The map had another man's name on it. The Englishman was right about the hill. That was the last thing about this dig that would be simple. Because now we come to the strange, vertiginous heart of the whole story, the part where finding and inventing stop being opposites and start being the same motion. Watch closely. This is where a man discovers something genuinely real by destroying the very thing he came to find. Beginning around 1871, Schliemann threw himself at the mound of Hisarlik with a force that had nothing scholarly about it. He had made 3 fortunes by moving fast and getting to the prize before anyone else could, and he attacked this hill the same way. He wanted Homer's Troy, and he made an assumption, a reasonable-sounding, utterly wrong assumption that would guide his shovels straight through disaster. He assumed that the oldest layer would be the Homeric one, that to find Priam's city, he had to dig down, all the way down, to the deepest and earliest level of the mound. Now, you have to understand what a mound like Hisarlik actually is, because his whole catastrophe lives inside this one fact. It is not a city. It is a layer cake of cities. For thousands of years, people built on that spot. It was a good spot, near the water, near the trade routes, and their town fell, or burned, or was abandoned. And the next people came and simply leveled the rubble flat and built their own town on top of it. And then that fell, and the next built on that. Again, and again, and again, for millennia, each dead city becoming the foundation of the next, until the accumulated remains stacked up into an artificial hill dozens of feet high. 9 cities, roughly, one on top of another, like the rings of a tree. Except that here, reading the rings correctly was the entire game. Because the Troy of Homer's war, if it was any of them, would be somewhere in the middle of that stack. Not at the top, which was too recent. And crucially, not at the bottom. The bottom was the oldest, and the oldest was 1,000 years too early. Get the layer wrong, and you would not be digging up Homer's Troy at all. You would be digging up the Troy of people who lived and died 1,000 years before Homer's Troy was ever built. Hold that. It is about to matter more than anything else in this story. Schliemann did not wait to work that out. He wanted the treasure, and he wanted it now. So he ordered his workforce, dozens, at times over 100 local laborers, with picks and shovels and wheelbarrows and hoists, to cut. And they cut. A colossal trench, driven straight down through the center of the mound. Something on the order of 15 to 17 meters deep, the height of a 5-story building, and dozens of meters across. A canyon gouged through the heart of the hill. And as that trench went down, it went down through the cities in the middle, through exactly the layers, the ones archaeologists now call Troy 6 and Troy 7, that have the best claim of all to being the Troy of the Trojan War. The walls, the houses, the streets, the burned and buried context of the very city he said he was looking for. His crews smashed through all of it, tore it apart, shoveled it aside as overburden, as rubble in the way of the real prize, and kept digging down toward the older gold beneath. There is a line I cannot improve on, from a modern historian who said that Schliemann accomplished what the besieging Greeks of legend never could. He finally leveled the walls of Troy. Other scholars have called his methods savage and brutal, even by the loose standards of his own day. No careful mapping, no record, as the objects came up, of exactly where in the trench each one had been found. Just earth moving on an industrial scale, in pursuit of headlines and gold. Picture the actual scene of it, because the scale is the point. This was not a scholar on his knees with a brush and a tray. At the height of the campaigns, Schliemann commanded a small army of local laborers, dozens of men, at times more than 100, swinging picks and hauling wheelbarrows, with mechanical hoists brought in for the heaviest loads. A 19th century construction site, essentially aimed at a hill. Objects were pulled from the earth, thrown into baskets, and carried off to Schliemann's table to be sorted and catalogued later after the fact, cut loose from the exact spot and the exact layer that would have told a real archaeologist what they actually were and when they were made. And here is why that carelessness matters more than it might seem, because it is not only about broken walls. When you rip an object out of the ground without recording the exact layer it came from, you destroy its story. You destroy the ability of anyone, ever, to check where it truly belonged. Schliemann didn't just demolish the physical city. By failing to record what he found as he found it, he demolished the evidence, the paper trail of the earth itself, that anyone might later have used to verify his claims. Which, for a man with his particular relationship to the truth, was either the greatest incompetence in the history of archaeology, or something a great deal more convenient than incompetence. A century later, a German-led team would return to this mound and spend decades painstakingly trying to reconstruct what his trench had erased, reading the scars he left, salvaging the context he threw away. They are, in a real sense, still cleaning up after him. Hold that thought. We are almost at the gold. But, and this is the countercurrent I need you to feel, because the story is not simply a vandal wrecks a ruin. Something real was happening down in that trench. Something genuinely thrilling. There was a city down there. An ancient one. Massive stone walls, gates, the fortifications of a real Bronze Age stronghold, rising out of the dirt exactly where a mocked English consul had said they would be. Whatever Schliemann got wrong, and he got a great deal wrong, this part was undeniably, gloriously right. The mound was not empty. Troy, in some real sense, was there. And I want to give that moment its due, because it is easy, knowing everything we now know, to be so busy condemning the man that we forget how astonishing it actually was. For nearly 3,000 years, Troy had been a word. A place in a poem, argued over by scholars, dismissed by the sensible as pure fable. There had probably never been any such city at all, most educated people assumed, any more than there had been a real Mount Olympus with real gods on top of it. And then, a retired businessman with more nerve than training drove a trench into a Turkish hillside, and the walls of the fable started coming up out of the ground. Stone. Real, mortared, defensible stone. You did not have to like Heinrich Schliemann to feel the floor shift under the whole idea of what myth was and was not. When those walls emerged, the excitement that rippled across the world was not entirely manufactured. It could not be faked, because it was the one thing in this whole story that was simply physically true. The man had bet a fortune on a hole in the ground, on the strength of a theory everyone else laughed at, and the earth had answered him. That is the vertigo of it. Both things are true at once, in the same trench, in the same motion of the same spade. He found a real, ancient, astonishing city. And he found it by pulverizing the one layer that mattered most, on his way down to a treasure that was in the wrong millennium entirely. So weigh this chapter carefully. because it is the only one all night where the scale genuinely tips toward finding. On the finding side, a true city, real walls, a Bronze Age stronghold pulled out of the earth against the scholarly consensus of the age. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, enormous. But on the inventing side, the annotation is just as heavy. He reached it on a borrowed theory he never credited, by a method that destroyed the proof, tearing down the truer Troy to reach the older gold. He found a city. He found it by breaking the city, finding Troy, inventing Troy. He reached a true city by smashing through the truer one just above it. Rest here a moment, at the bottom of the trench, before we open what he found. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight, and what the hour is where you are. I like knowing who's still awake in the dark with me. And then, in the last days of May, 1873, at the very bottom of the Great Trench, something catches the lamplight. He had his city. Now he needed a king to have owned it. So let us go back to that night we opened on. The lamplight, the gold, the quiet theft, but this time from the inside. Because now you know the man. You know what he does with a true thing when he gets his hands on one. He improves it. The hoard itself was staggering, and it was real. Copper cauldrons and vessels, weapons, and the gold, bracelets, goblets, 2 magnificent diadems, and thousands upon thousands of tiny gold rings and beads and studs, the kind of accumulated wealth that stops the breath in your throat. Schliemann had gone down into the earth chasing a legend, and he had come up with a fortune in ancient gold. On that, there is no dispute. The gold came out of the ground at Hisarlik. It exists. You can go and look at it, though you will have to travel to Moscow to do it, and that is a story for the next chapter. What Schliemann did with it, though, that is the masterpiece. Not the digging, the marketing. Within weeks, he had given the hoard a name. He called it the Treasure of Priam. Priam, the aged, doomed king of Troy in Homer's tale, the father of Hector, the man who kneels before Achilles to beg for his dead son's body. Schliemann announced to the world that he had found that king's own treasure, the royal gold of the city of the Iliad. And then he produced the image that would seal it forever. He dressed his young wife in the jewels. Sophia, the Greek girl he had chosen partly for exactly this, for how she would look wearing the ancient world, was photographed draped in the gold of the hoard. The great diadem hung across her forehead, that curtain of fine gold chains and leaves falling to frame her face. Earrings, necklaces. And Schliemann gave these pieces their second, even more seductive name. The jewels of Helen, Helen of Troy. The most beautiful woman in the world, the face over which the war was fought. And here, apparently, was her jewelry, worn by a living woman, captured in a photograph, for the newspapers of every capital in Europe to reproduce. It worked. My word, it worked. That photograph became one of the most reproduced images in the entire history of archaeology. It did in an instant what no scholarly monograph ever could. It took a legally dubious, scientifically unexamined pile of gold and welded it permanently in the public mind to the most romantic story Western civilization owns. Helen, Troy. Love and war, and a beautiful woman in a dead queen's crown. Nobody stopped to check the metallurgy. Nobody paused over the excavation records. There weren't any worth the name. The image was too good. The story was too good. The legend was launched, and it was airborne before a single expert could get a hand on it. And I want you to appreciate the sheer commercial genius of it, because this is where the commodities trader and the myth maker finally become the same person. Schliemann had spent 30 years learning one lesson above all others: that value is not in the thing, it is in the story you can attach to the thing. Raw gold dust is just metal in a pan until a banker gives it a route to the mint. A pile of Bronze Age jewelry is just old metal in a crate until a showman drapes it on a beautiful young woman and gives her the name of the most famous beauty who ever lived. It is the identical move. He had done it with indigo and gold dust and gunpowder, extracting the margin between what a thing was and what people could be made to believe it was worth. Now he did it one last time, with the deepest myth in the culture as his raw material, and the margin he extracted was immortality. He was not, in that photograph, being an archaeologist at all. He was doing the only thing he had ever truly done. He was selling. And it was wrong. All of it. Wrong by a margin so vast, it is almost difficult to hold in the mind. Here is the marked bill I asked you to carry, and here is where it goes off. The layer of the mound that gold came from is the one archaeologists call Troy II. And Troy II has been dated. This is settled. This is not a matter of live dispute, to somewhere around 2500 to 2300 years before Christ. Now, the Trojan War of legend, if it happened at all, belongs to a Troy of roughly 1200 years before Christ. Do the arithmetic. The gold Schliemann called Priam's treasure was already more than 1,000 years old when Priam's city was built. More than 1,000 years old when Helen was supposed to have walked the earth. Think about the scale of that era. It is not a near miss. Calling that hoard the jewels of Helen is like digging up a Viking sword and announcing it belonged to a soldier in the First World War. The gap is the whole of recorded history over again. Priam never touched that gold. Helen was not born, would not be born in the story for 1,000 years when it went into the ground. The single most famous treasure in the romance of archaeology is a misnomer by a full millennium. And Schliemann sold it anyway, exactly as the cold open warned you he would. Now layer the second crack over the first. Recall the scene he sold, because it is a masterpiece of staging. In his telling, he spots gold glinting in the trench wall with his own sharp eyes. And rather than let his workmen see it and swarm it, he coolly calls a sudden early lunch break, sends the whole crew off to rest, so that he and he alone can be there for the sacred moment. And then his brave young wife stands beside him in the empty trench, and together, in secret, the two of them cut the treasure free with a knife and gather it up into her shawl. just the two of them, alone with the gold of a lost age. It is staged like a scene from an opera. The clearing of the stage, the two lovers, the knife, the shawl, and the leading lady was not in the building. He admitted, later, in his own hand, that Sophia was not there at all. She was in Athens, in mourning for her father. There was no shawl, no two-person heist, no knife passed between husband and wife in the empty trench. He wrote her into the scene the same way he wrote himself into President Fillmore's dinner, because the scene played better with her in it. The most intimate, heroic detail of the discovery, he simply made up. And once you know he invented the woman in the story, you are forced to ask the harder question, the one scholars have argued over ever since. How much else of the discovery did he invent? Because his own accounts of that day do not agree with each other. Push on the dates and they slide around. His various tellings imply the treasure surfaced anywhere from the 27th of May to as late as the 7th or 10th of June. A man does not misremember the single greatest day of his life by 2 weeks, unless the day was not a memory at all, but a construction, a dramatic scene assembled after the fact and touched up in the retelling, which is exactly what a shifting date suggests. This is where I have to be careful with you, and I want you to notice me being careful, because it is the whole ethic of this story. There is a serious argument, made by serious scholars, that the treasure was not a single find at all, that it was a composite, objects Schliemann gathered from different spots and different days across the dig, then presented to the world as one glittering, unified moment of discovery. One scholar titled his analysis flatly, Priam's Treasure, clearly a composite. The evidence for it is real. The shifting dates, the absence of proper records, the inconsistencies in Schliemann's own tellings, and the plain fact that this was a man with a documented, lifelong habit of improving true events into better stories. And there is one more shadow across it, and it fell a few years later, at a different dig. In 1876, Schliemann took his shovels to Mycenae, in Greece, and there he pulled from a grave a magnificent golden death mask and announced, in a line the world still repeats, that he had gazed upon the face of Agamemnon, the king who led the Greeks to Troy. Another perfect story, another perfect object attached to another legendary name. And that mask, too, has never fully escaped suspicion. Scholars have noted, uneasily, that Schliemann was documented in other contexts as being perfectly willing to have copies of ancient objects manufactured and passed off as genuine. And some have called, for over a century now, for the mask to be independently tested. The museum that holds it has always declined. Now, I must be fair, and I will be. This is a different find, at a different site, and it is not proof of anything about the Troy gold. But it speaks to the man's methods and to the pattern. When the same magician does the same trick at two different theaters, you are at least entitled to wonder about the deck. But, and here is the careful part, no one has ever proven any of it. There is a serious scholar on the other side of this, too, and fairness demands I give him his say. He went back through Schliemann's actual daybooks, the working records of the dig, and he found no direct documentary smoking gun, Nothing that flatly proves the hoard was salted or purchased or stitched together from separate finds. His position, in essence, is a careful one. Yes, Schliemann was an unreliable narrator of his own life, a documented fabulist about his dinners and his dreams and his fires. But that is a different question from whether the physical treasure itself was faked. And on that narrower question, he argues, the hard evidence simply runs out. The title of his best-known essay on the man is, fittingly, a question and not an answer. Hero or fraud? So the honest position, the one I will hold to, is this. The evidence strongly suggests that the treasure was not found the way Schliemann said it was found. Whether that means it was stitched together from separate finds, or simply that a real discovery was wrapped in an invented scene, that we cannot say for certain. And anyone who tells you they can is selling you the same kind of too perfect story the man himself specialized in. What is beyond dispute is only this. He had already proven, over and over and over, that he would lie about how a story happened even when the underlying event was perfectly real. Once a man has shown you that, you are never again obliged to take his word for the shape of a miracle. His own contemporaries saw it. There was a saying about him, among the skeptical scholars of his own day, a little pun that went, "He who hideth can find." A joke and a knife inside the joke. That Heinrich Schliemann was just as talented at planting treasure as he was at discovering it. That was not my verdict. That was theirs, spoken while the man still lived. So, how do I weigh this chapter? I don't. I can't. Look at the columns. On one side, real gold, genuinely ancient, genuinely pulled from a genuinely important site. On the other, the wrong king, the wrong queen, the wrong millennium, an invented wife in an invented scene, and a discovery whose very shape may have been manufactured. The scale doesn't tip, it just trembles. Some nights the auditor reaches a verdict, and some nights he simply sets the pen down and lets the two truths sit there on the desk, side by side, refusing to become one. Finding Troy. Inventing Troy. Real gold. The wrong 1,000 years. Calder sets the pen down. Legends are never audited in time, but they are eventually audited. He died famous. Then the auditors arrived, with his own diaries in their hands. Schliemann lived out his years as a celebrated man, the discoverer of Troy, feted across Europe, and he died in 1890 with the legend fully intact and gleaming. The dream, the discovery, the treasure, the devoted wife in the ancient crown, the whole story stood, and the world believed it, and went on believing it for a very long time. This is the part that ought to trouble us most, and I will come back to it. The lie did not fall apart on contact with the truth. It won. For the better part of a century, it simply won. But an audit, unlike a legend, is patient. And two of them were coming for Heinrich Schliemann. They ran in parallel, decades apart, and they rhymed with each other so precisely that I still find it hard to believe they were not arranged by some tidy-minded god of consequences. Let me take them one at a time. The first audit was quiet, scholarly. It was carried out across the whole 20th century by classicists and archaeologists doing the least glamorous work imaginable, sitting in archives, reading a dead man's diaries line by line, and cross-checking every claim in them against the outside record. Shipping manifests, newspaper dates, other people's letters, the dull, patient arithmetic of catching a liar. A scholar named David Trail was the center of it. Over decades of work, this was not a paper. It was the labor of a career. He went through Schliemann's papers and, one by one, pulled the fabrications into the light. And he was not entirely alone. A fellow classicist, William Calder, had been pulling at the same threads from another direction. Between them, the fabrications came up. The White House dinner with President Fillmore, which Calder pinned down as lifted from a newspaper report, no record of the visit at all, invented. The eyewitness account of the San Francisco fire, dated a month wrong, describing an event he arrived too late to see, cribbed from the papers. The lifelong childhood dream of Troy, which Trail showed was absent from every diary until the man was 46, painted on long after the fact. Trail assembled so many of these, so consistently, that he was driven toward a hard and clinical conclusion that Schliemann was, in his pattern of invention, something very close to a pathological liar, a man who did not merely embellish for an audience, but who manufactured events in his own private diaries, where there was no one to fool but himself. And that last detail is the one that ought to give you a small chill if you are still awake enough to feel it. We can all understand a man lying to the world, for money, for fame, for love, but a man who lies to his own diary, who invents, in the pages no one will ever read, a dinner that never happened, and then presumably closes the book and goes to sleep believing it a little more than he did that morning. That is not calculation anymore. That is a man for whom the boundary between what happened and what should have happened had simply worn away. He was not at the end choosing to deceive. He had lost the ability to tell the difference. And there is something almost pitiable in it. The richest self-made man in Russia, lying to himself in the dark, because even to himself the true story was not quite good enough. Calder pressed the same skeptical eye further still, out to Schliemann's later finds in Greece. Others joined across the decades, each taking a piece of the myth and testing whether it held. And it was in that long, collective effort that the second great correction was made, the one I promised you back in the dark of Chapter 3. Frank Calvert came back. A historian named Susan Huck Allen went into Calvert's own papers, his unpublished correspondence, the private record of the quiet man Schliemann had erased, and she reconstructed, in full, what he had actually done. The 15 years. The theory. The correct identification of Hisarlik against the fashion of the age. The generosity that had handed it all to the wrong man. Her work put Calvert's name back onto the discovery of Troy, where it had belonged all along. Nearly a century too late for him to know it. But the record, at last, was corrected. The mark was named. The auditor, as I told you he would, got there in the end. And then there is the second audit. The one that happened not to the man's reputation, but to the gold itself. And this one, forgive me, but I find a cold poetry in it. This one is the treasure getting a taste of exactly what Schliemann dished out. Follow the gold after his death. He gave it, in the end, to Germany, and it went on display in Berlin, in a museum of early history, where it sat in glass for over 60 years. Priam's treasure, the jewels of Helen, the crown jewels of archaeology, on show in the heart of Europe. Then came 1945, the Red Army closing on Berlin. As the city fell, the treasure, which a careful curator had moved into a fortified bunker for safekeeping, was seized, gathered up by the Soviet Union's art-looting trophy brigades, the units whose job was to carry the cultural wealth of a defeated Germany back east. And the gold of Troy was flown to Moscow, and then it vanished. Not lost, hidden, because for the entire length of the Cold War, decade after decade, the Soviet government simply denied that it had the treasure at all. Officially, publicly, Priam's gold was gone, destroyed in the war, perhaps. Lost. The Soviets said they knew nothing, and the world, having no way to prove otherwise, more or less believed them. The most famous treasure in archaeology disappeared into a state-sized lie and stayed there for roughly 48 years. Do you know how it broke? Not through diplomacy, through an accident and a photocopier. In 1987, a young Soviet researcher named Grigory Kozlov was wandering the basement of the Ministry of Culture, looking, this is true, for a photocopier. And he stumbled onto documents, papers that suggested the Trojan gold had survived the war after all, and was sitting, right then, in Soviet hands. He told a fellow researcher, Konstantin Akinsha, and the two of them began quietly pulling the thread, and eventually exposed not just the survival of Priam's treasure, but the whole vast, buried program of Soviet art looting it belonged to. Akinsha and Kozlov did not stop at the gold either. What they had pulled on was one loose thread of an enormous garment, and as they kept pulling, the whole shape of the thing came into view. A vast, systematic Soviet program of art looting, whole museums worth of Europe's cultural treasure carried east in the last days of the war, and then simply denied for decades at the level of the state. They laid it out in a landmark magazine expose in 1991, and later in a book, and the Trojan gold turned out to be merely the most famous prisoner in a very large and very quiet vault. It took another few years for the state to admit the gold itself out loud. But in 1993, Russia finally confirmed what it had denied for half a century. The treasure was in Moscow, at the Pushkin Museum, and had been all along. By the following year, they put it on display. Priam's gold resurfaced behind Russian glass, where, I should tell you, it still sits today. Germany has asked for it back more than once. Russia has declined, framing the treasure as fair compensation for the immense cultural destruction Germany inflicted on the Soviet Union during the war. Both things, notice, can be argued with a straight face, which is precisely why the argument has never resolved. And so the treasure remains where the trophy brigades put it, a stolen thing that was stolen again, claimed now by a third party who says the theft was only justice. The gold has changed hands, In the end, more often than it ever changed meaning. Sit with the shape of that. Schliemann smuggled the gold out of Ottoman ground in the dark, in defiance of the rules, and lied about how he came to have it. And then, 70 years later, another power smuggled it out of Berlin in the dark, in defiance of the rules, and lied about it for half a century. The gold learned nothing and taught nothing. It simply repeated, buried by someone with a reputation to protect, and dug up, eventually, by someone with no stake in protecting it. Which, now that I say it aloud, is the exact shape of the man's whole life. And underneath all of it, one last irony, the quietest and the largest. Long after Schliemann was gone, archaeologists went back to that ravaged mound and dug it properly, carefully, with all the modern tools he never had or wanted. And they confirmed it. There is a real, substantial Bronze Age city in those layers, the very layers his great trench tore through on its way down. The place kept being Troy. It was Troy before he came, and it was Troy after he wrecked it, and it is Troy now. No thanks to him. Every bit thanks to the ground itself, and to the quiet Englishmen who read the ground correctly first. Weigh it, and you feel the balance finally coming to rest, not in triumph, not in scandal, just in the slow, level truth of a thing fully audited at last. Every lie he told was eventually caught. Every debt he refused to pay was eventually recorded. And the one real thing under all of it stood there the whole time, waiting, indifferent to his story. Finding Troy. Inventing Troy. The last evidence is in, and Calder closes the file, but does not yet read the ruling. If the ledgers of the night suit you, I keep a quieter collection over on Spotify, a show called Sleepy Case Files, where stories like this one are arranged for the edge of sleep. It's waiting there whenever you need somewhere soft to fall, which leaves only the question we came in with, and one true thing at the bottom of it all. So, the evidence is in, all of it, and it is time to render the verdict. The only verdict this night is entitled to. Let me first tell you what I will not convict him of, because a fair audit is careful about the difference between what is proven and what is merely suspected, and this whole story has lived or died on that line. I will not convict him of fraud in Sacramento. That was an accusation, never tried, never proven, a Rothschild agent's suspicion and a hasty departure, and suspicion is not a verdict. I will not convict him of faking the treasure itself. The evidence strongly suggests he did not find it the way he said, but strongly suggests is not the same as proven. And an honest auditor does not sign his name to a charge. The documents will not fully carry. On the specific contested counts, Heinrich Schliemann walks. Not because he is innocent, because the proof does not close. But that was never really the charge tonight, was it? Our question was never a narrow one about this dig or that consignment. Our question was the big one, the one in the title. Did he find Troy, or did he invent it? And here, at last, the ledger can be read, because the answer, the only true answer, is both. And I do not mean that as a dodge. I do not mean he did a little of each. I mean that in this one extraordinary case, finding and inventing turned out to be the same act, performed by the same man, with the same relentless will, in the same trench, at the same time. He found Troy. That is simply true. There is a real Bronze Age city under that mound at Hisarlik. Frank Calvert was right, and Schliemann, for all that he stole the credit, put his money and his monomania behind Calvert's correct idea when the entire scholarly world was looking the other way, and dragged the lost city back onto the map of human memory. Without him, or someone like him, that hill might have stayed a hill for another century. He found it. Give him that. History does. And he invented Troy. That is just as true. He invented the childhood dream that made him a hero. He invented the White House dinner and the fire he never saw. He invented his wife's presence in the trench. He invented a king and a queen to own the gold, and he was wrong about them by 1,000 years. He erased the man who drew his map. He wrapped a real discovery in so much manufactured story that the story swallowed the discovery whole. The Troy you carry in your head, the boy who dreamed, the genius who dug, the lovers in the lamplight with the treasure. That Troy is his invention. He built it, and it has outlived every correction the scholars have ever filed against it. I want you to feel how unusual that verdict is. Most of the time, when we say a story is part true and part false, we mean it the way we mean a watered-down drink, that the truth has been diluted, weakened, that if we could just strain out the lies, we would be left with something smaller but pure. That is not what happened here. With Schliemann, the true part and the false part are not mixed. They are fused, welded at the molecular level. You cannot strain the lie out of the truth, because the same act produced both. The trench that found the real city is the trench that destroyed the real evidence. The gold that is genuinely, breathtakingly ancient is the gold that proves the king it was named for could never have owned it. The monomania that put a lost city back on the map is the same monomania that could not resist gilding it with a fable. Take away the Conman, and you take away the discovery. There is no version of this story where a careful, honest scholar gets the credit, because a careful, honest scholar in 1871 would not have sunk a fortune into a mound the whole profession had dismissed. It took a man willing to lie about everything, to be reckless enough to be right about the one thing that mattered. Now, here is the reframe I want to leave you with as the room dims. The thing this whole strange life has to teach. We tend to think of a lie and the truth as opposites, that a con is a thing made of pure falsehood, and that if we are only careful enough, we can sort the fake from the real and throw the fake away. Schliemann's life says otherwise. The most durable illusion ever built in the history of archaeology was not made of pure falsehood. It could not have been. A pure lie is brittle. It shatters the moment the truth walks in. What made Schliemann's legend indestructible was that he built it around one extraordinary, verifiable, undeniable true thing. A real lost city. Real ancient gold. And once those genuine articles were at the center of it, Every falsehood he arranged around them borrowed their solidity. The true city made the invented dream feel true. The real gold made the wrong king feel real. He understood, maybe better than any man of his century, that a single true thing, held up at exactly the right angle, will light up every falsehood standing near it and make the whole arrangement glow like destiny. That was his genius. Not archaeology. He was a wrecking ball with a shovel. Not even commerce. In the end, though he was magnificent at it, his genius was knowing that the strongest lie is the one wrapped tightest around a truth. The three fortunes were made in chaos, in the seams of the world where the rules had not yet arrived. But the fourth and final fortune, the legend, the one that made him immortal, that one was made in the gap between how fast a story travels and how slowly the truth gets checked. He published the legend on the front page. The correction ran, in pieces, across 100 years of journals almost no one reads. A legend, unlike a ledger, is almost never audited in time. And here is the proof of it, the proof you can test in your own mind, right now. Everything I have told you tonight, the backdated dream, the erased Englishman, the wrong millennium, the wife who wasn't there, every bit of it has been known to scholars for decades. It is not secret. It is not suppressed. It is all right there, sitting in the record, fully audited, thoroughly proven. And yet, when you close your eyes and think of the discovery of Troy, which story rises? The corrected one, dry and careful, with its footnotes about stratigraphy and its credit to Frank Calvert. Or his, the boy who dreamed, the genius who dug, the gold pulled from the earth, the beautiful woman in the ancient crown. Be honest. It is his. It is always his. Even now, even in a season when the old stories are being retold on every screen, the ships and the wanderer and the long way home, the Troy that lives in the culture is not the archaeologist's Troy. It is the Conman's. He won. 130 years dead, comprehensively caught, and he is still winning in your head tonight. The last and greatest product the self-made man ever sold was himself. And 150 years later, the world is still holding the merchandise. Finding Troy. Inventing Troy. Both. So what do you carry out of this study tonight, as the lamp burns down? Not a moral. I have never been much for those. Call it a set of instruments. 5 of them. Quiet advantages for the ones still awake in the dark. 1. Wealth is made in the seams. Every one of Schliemann's fortunes came from a place where the rules had not yet arrived. A boomtown with no bank. A war with a blockade to run. A market too new to be watched. The operators who win are rarely the strongest. They are the ones standing in the gap before anyone else notices the gap is there. And, mark this, they are the ones who leave before the audit, not after. 2. Every self-made story you have ever admired was edited. Every single one. The question is never whether a great man polished his own legend. They all do. The question is only how much and where the seams are. So when a biography arrives too clean, too destined, too perfectly shaped from childhood dream to triumphant end, do not admire it. Read it as a prospectus, because that is what it is. 3. Institutions do not stop determined capital. They invoice it. Schliemann stole a nation's treasure and paid a fine several times over, gladly, because to him the fine was never a punishment. It was a price, and he could afford the price. Understand that the powerful have always known the difference between a law that stops you and a law that merely charges you. It is a weapon in the right hands. It is a warning in yours. 4. Credit the Calverts. Somewhere near every loud, famous founder, there is a quiet person who did the real thinking first and got written out of the story. History is slow, but it is not blind. It came back for Frank Calvert in the end, a century late. It tends to come back for them. So, on a long enough timeline, the quiet researcher outlasts the loud genius. Be slow to believe the lone genius. There is almost always a Calvert. And 5. The strongest lie is built around one true thing. This is the one I most want you to keep. When you go to audit anyone, a company, a rival, a hero, yourself, do not start by hunting for the obvious falsehood. The obvious falsehood is a decoy. It is cheap. Anyone can spot it. Start instead with the part that is verifiably, undeniably real. The genuine credential. The real revenue. The actual, breathtaking gold in the trench. And then ask the harder question, the one almost no one thinks to ask. Ask what that true thing is being used to carry. Because the real gold is rarely the lie. The real gold is what makes the lie impossible to throw away. It is the ballast that keeps a whole cargo of falsehood afloat. Schliemann understood that a single genuine wonder, placed at the dead center of a story, will vouch for everything else in the frame. Find the genuine wonder, and then look very carefully at everything standing next to it, borrowing its light. And then, the last thought floated soft for a mind already drifting towards sleep. Every one of us keeps 2 books. There is the ledger, the plain record of what actually happened, the dates that don't move, the debts we actually owe. And there is the legend, the story of who we are, the version we tell at dinner, the shape we give our own past so that it points, cleanly, at the person we wish to be. Schliemann's only real crime, in the end, was doing openly and magnificently what nearly all of us do quietly, in the dark, to ourselves. He published the legend. So as you drift off tonight, no need to answer, just let it settle. Ask which of the 2 books you are writing in today, the ledger or the legend. Most of us, if we are honest in the last quiet minutes before sleep, write a little in both. We round the number up. We remember the argument as more graceful than it was. We give the story of our own day a shape that points, just slightly, toward the person we would like to have been. It is not wickedness. It is how a self is held together. Schliemann only did it louder and richer, and with a Bronze Age city for a prop. And so the real question is not whether you keep a legend. You do. We all do. But whether there is something true and solid at the center of yours to carry the weight of it. Ask yourself, gently, as the lamp goes down, if the audit came tomorrow, if some patient soul went through your diaries 100 years from now, cross-checking every claim against the record, would the one true thing at the bottom of your story be enough? Enough to make all the rest of it glow. Sleep on that. The gold, after all, was always real. It was only ever the story that needed watching. Since you made it this far, I'm glad you enjoyed the episode. If you would like to continue listening to episodes with similar themes, I linked them in the description below. You will also find a playlist of our most popular videos. Sleep now, Midnight Magnates. And wake up, as always, a little stronger and a little wiser. The story is done, but yours continues.